For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello, I'm John Cassanet, and welcome to Unveiling Jesus Christ for another podcast. In my last podcast, I talked about the physical and spiritual foundations laid at Adam-ondi-Ahman during an ancient gathering of Adam's righteous posterity 3 years before his death. I spent a good deal of time talking about the two spiritual foundations, which included the establishment of the patriarchal priesthood and, secondly, the patriarchal order of the priesthood. The patriarchal order, of course, begins with the temple sealing ordinance. In that podcast, I stated that the first temple sealing ordinances occurred at the ancient gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman 3 years before Adam died. There is no scriptural declaration which confirms this timeline. Furthermore, since almost 1,000 years passed since the fall, before I'm saying the temple ordinances were initiated, we might well ask ourselves whether they waited that long for it actually to happen. Was it administered before that time? And if not, why not? That's what I'll be talking about today. For the nutshell version of this podcast, you can check out section 130 in my book. From my prior podcasts, we know that 3 years before Adam died, he gathered his righteous posterity to Adam-ondi-Ahman. We also know he did this to prepare them to enter the Lord's presence. My last podcast made this pretty clear, including this quote from President Ezra Taft Benson, who asked, "How did Adam bring his descendants into the presence of the Lord?" Today, we would say they went to the house of the Lord and received their blessings. Close quote. Joseph Fielding McConkie was convinced that the city of Adam-ondi-Ahman had a temple, saying, "As to what became of Eden, the scriptures are silent. Perhaps, after Adam and his righteous posterity had built the city of Adam-ondi-Ahman, which undoubtedly would have had a temple, Eden was no longer needed as a place of God's presence." Close quote. Now, it's kind of interesting when you stop and think about the idea that a temple had been constructed at Adam-ondi-Ahman anciently. It would not be at all surprising that during this gathering of faithful saints at Adam-ondi-Ahman, they not only initiated temple covenants, they may very well have dedicated the temple that they built at Adam-ondi-Ahman at that time. Just food for thought. My last podcast made it clear, hopefully, that temple ordinances were a primary purpose, if not the purpose, for the ancient gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman. Enoch may well have served as the temple recorder on this occasion, since he wrote the missing book of Enoch, where he described the temple ordinances performed at Adam-ondi-Ahman. Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verse 57, tells us that Enoch kept the books of Adam, and Adam's words and prophecies were all written in the book of Enoch. Joseph Fielding McConkie spoke of the book of Enoch, saying, "Adam called his posterity together at Adam-ondi-Ahman to bless them, and that he, being full of the Holy Ghost, predicted whatsoever should befall his posterity unto the latest generation." The information revealed to Adam was to be made available to Adam's posterity in the book of Enoch. This is also the view expressed in 2 Enoch, where Enoch is to preserve the writings of Adam and Seth, as well as his own, in the book which bears his name. Close quote. Hugh Nibley talks about a book entitled Enoch the Prophet, and then adds his unique insight, saying, quote, "The Hebrew book of Enoch bore the title of Hechalot, referring to the various chambers or stages of initiation in the temple. I will not say but what Enoch had temples and officiated therein," said Brigham Young, "but we have no account of it. Today, we do have such accounts." Close quote. And that's Hugh Nibley adding his insight into the fact that we have accounts from other books that talk about ancient temples. Hiram Andrus also spoke of the patriarchal order established at Adam-ondi-Ahman, saying, the requirement to organize the divine patriarchal order through gospel rites and ordinances in order to bring the faithful into the presence of God suggests that when Adam met with his children in council, he confirmed carefully that all the necessary ordinances had been performed and recorded in their behalf. This he would want to do as the presiding figure over the eternal family order before leaving this mortal state. Since Enoch and his people were at the great patriarchal council, it is possible that in the actions of the priesthood significant things were done to prepare the way for the Lord to dwell in Zion of Enoch and manifest his glory to that sanctified people for a period of time before they were taken from the earth. Brigham Young stated that Enoch's people entered into a state of rest, returned to the presence of God by making their calling and election sure to celestial glory and being sealed to eternal life before they acquired the power to be translated. Close quote. In short, before Enoch and the city of Zion were translated, they received their temple ordinances at Adam-ondi-Ahman and had their calling and election made sure to exaltation. For a discussion of callings and elections, check out my podcast from August 27 of 2024. Now, I hasten to add that I've talked about this on other occasions, that the city of Enoch and her residents were translated anciently, but then they were resurrected at the time of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And as I have said before, you only get resurrected to exaltation if you first have your temple ordinances performed. All this kind of ties together, saying that Enoch and his people received their temple covenants at the gathering of Adam-ondi-Ahman, and perhaps as time went on from there, to then make them worthy to enter into the Lord's presence, to be exalted, so that after they were translated, they could then be resurrected at the time of Jesus Christ. Now, getting back to the ancient record of Enoch, this record remains largely hidden from the world, as is always the case where sacred temple ordinances are concerned. For example, in the book of Abraham, facsimile 2, figure 8, states, quote, contains writing that cannot be revealed unto the world, but is to be had in the holy temple of God, close quote. Bruce R. McConkie spoke of the contents of Enoch's book, saying, one of the things yet to come forth in the last days is the book of Enoch. This record contains the prophecies made by Adam at Adam-ondi-Ahman when he predicted whatsoever should befall his posterity to the latest generation. Close quote. Elder McConkie also explained that ordinances had to be performed in the Lord's sanctuaries, though not secret, are of such a sacred nature as to be reserved for the eyes and ears and hearts of those only who attained spiritual maturity, prepares them to receive the mysteries of the kingdom. Temple ordinances, whether ancient or modern, are not published to the world, close quote. As I mentioned at the outset, we have no scriptural declarations that temple ordinances were or were not performed before the time that Adam's righteous posterity gathered to Adam-ondi-Ahman 3 years before his death. Orson Pratt spoke of the 8 righteous generations that attended the gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman, saying this, the righteous of all Adam's posterity were assembled with him in that place in the valley called Adam-ondi-Ahman. I do not know that those holy men who assembled in conference with Adam had any promise beforehand that they should behold the face of the Lord. The Lord appeared to them and gave them much consolation, and he set Adam to be their head, to be a prince over them, and over all his righteous posterity forever, close quote. Even though Orson Pratt states that he doesn't have any information that Adam's posterity had been promised beforehand that they would see the face of the Lord, Bruce R. McConkie spoke of this gathering as a high point, saying, quote, "One of the high points in the ministerial and worshipful experiences of the ancient patriarchs occurred in 3077 BC, 3 years before Adam's spirit took leave of its mortal tenement. On that occasion, Adam called Seth, Enos, Cainus, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah, who were all high priests with the residue of his posterity, who were righteous, into the valley of Adam-ondi-Ahman, and there bestowed upon them his last blessing." Close quote. It seems to me that if this was just a going away party for Adam, that would not rise to the level of a high point in worship. By the same token, if temple worship had been occurring for hundreds of years before Adam died, this gathering would have no particular significance above others other than wishing Adam a fair bon voyage. Now, Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verses 42 through 52, tells us that some of Adam's male descendants were ordained to an office of patriarch within the patriarchal or evangelical priesthood before the gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman. These were not temple ordinances that united husbands and wives in the patriarchal order of the priesthood, as I talked about in my last podcast. If so, in other words, if that were the case, then Noah was married at the very young age of 10 years old, because that's when he was ordained to the patriarchal priesthood. And we're told this explicitly in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verse 52, which says, quote, "Noah was 10 years old when he was ordained under the hand of Methuselah." Close quote. So how do we know that Adam waited until the end of his life to gather his righteous posterity at Adam-ondi-Ahman to institute the sealing ordinance for the first time? I have 7 reasons why this appears to be the case as follows. First, Adam and Eve were married for time and eternity in Eden before the fall. After the fall, they became spiritually dead. That is, they were shut out of God's presence when expelled from the Garden of Eden. They retained their memory of God, but did not know or understand the details concerning the plan of salvation. Elder B.H. Roberts said that with the fall of Adam, there seems to have come a forgetfulness of the plan of salvation devised in the councils of the Elohim before Adam's earth life began. And though Adam, in his fallen state, had apparently lost his recollection of these things ordained before the foundations of the world, yet he was obedient to the commands of the Lord. Close quote. For this reason, many days after Adam had been cast out of the garden and had been offering sacrifices, an angel asked him why he offered sacrifices to the Lord, and Adam said, "I know not, save the Lord has commanded it." After this, we're told by Milton R. Hunter that Jesus began his work as the Savior here upon the earth by revealing to Adam and Eve the gospel. Line upon line and precept upon precept were revealed until they had received the same gospel plan in its fullness as we have it today. Close quote. As Adam and Eve grew spiritually, much as we grow today, gospel ordinances were then instituted among them, starting with baptism. The Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 6:67 states that when the Lord had spoken with Adam our father, that Adam cried unto the Lord, and he was caught away by the Spirit of the Lord, and was carried down into the water, and was laid under the water, and was brought forth out of the water, and thus he was baptized. Close quote. Adam and Eve taught the gospel to their children and prepared them to receive their ordinances. Once they were fully reconciled to God through the first principles and ordinances of the gospel, their Edenic sealing for time and for all eternity was fully efficacious, and they possessed the fullness of the priesthood. That was not the case with their offspring, of course. Yes, they could be baptized in any old lake or river, but the higher ordinances of exaltation required more. Joseph Fielding Smith said that in 1841, the Lord revealed to the prophet that the fullness of the priesthood was available to men only in the temple, in a house built to his name. And in 1843, the prophet said, if a man gets a fullness of the priesthood of God, he has got to get it in the same way that Jesus Christ obtained it, and that was by keeping all the commandments and obeying all the ordinances of the house of the Lord. Close quote. All this suggests to me, as what has been alluded to earlier, that there was a temple at Adam-ondi-Ahman, and we know that as Adam and Eve's children came into the lives of our first parents, there was trouble in River City from an early age. I discussed this in my podcast on the rise of Cain to the level of Master Mahan, which we posted on YouTube on December 31 of 2024. There was a division among the righteous and the wicked. After the righteous posterity of Adam and Eve proved themselves worthy of the lesser laws and lesser ordinances, they could then receive the greater law and the greater ordinances. To that end, they gathered at Adam-ondi-Ahman to receive from Adam the culminating ordinance of the gospel at the culmination of Adam's mortal life. John F. Bowman said that in the valley of Adam-ondi-Ahman is where Adam dwelt, and when he was 927 years old, stooped with age, he called his faithful followers together in that valley to receive an accounting of their stewardships and to bless them. And on that occasion, certainly the most important gathering that had been in the history of the world up to that point in time. Close quote. Two things about this statement lead me to conclude that the first temple ordinances occurred on this occasion. First, only Adam's faithful followers were present. In other words, only the temple recommend holders. And two, they gave an accounting of their stewardships. In today's world, you might say they had to get their temple recommends, right? The other thing that is noteworthy also, I noticed that John Bowman says this had to have been the most important gathering that had been held in the history of the world up to that time. Well, if temple ordinances had been going on for a long period of time before then, I'm not sure how we can say that this would have been the most important gathering in the history of the world up to that time. Now, my second reason to conclude that Adam-ondi-Ahman was the first occasion for temple ordinance is that when Adam and Eve were married for eternity before the fall, Abraham facsimile 2 and the explanation of figure 3 tells us that the grand key words of the holy priesthood were revealed to Adam in the Garden of Eden. Close quote. Long after that, the same words were revealed to Seth and others after him. As the prophet gave the rites of the temple to the saints at Nauvoo, he remarked that he was then setting forth the order pertaining to the Ancient of Days. This was the ancient order of things. Essentially, it was the same plan that had been given to Adam. Joseph Smith also wrote that those sacred rites were administered to Seth, Noah, Melchizedek, Abraham, and all to whom the priesthood was revealed. Finally, he taught that the order of the house of God has been and ever will be the same. Close quote. Now, why do I say that the same key words were revealed to Seth and others after him long after Adam had first heard of the keys in the Garden of Eden? Is kind of simple. These prophets didn't exist. Seth wasn't born and wouldn't be born for another 130 years after the fall. And then it took another several hundred years before you get to Adam-ondi-Ahman, where Adam then, being a possessor of the key words, could then give them to Seth. And then followed the other persons such as Noah, Melchizedek, and Abraham, all of whom were not at Adam-ondi-Ahman either. So Seth became the presiding high priest in the patriarchal order after Adam's death. Wilford Griggs provides the following insights from several apocryphal writings saying, while Adam was the founder of the covenant race, it was Seth and his successors who perpetuated the covenant people and who came to be known as the seed of the great Seth, or the great, incorruptible, immovable race of the great mighty men of the great Seth. And he's here quoting several apocryphal works. Among the covenants preserved by this people are marriage for eternity and the enthronement of the righteous. And there he's quoting the second treatise of the great Seth. Close quote. Seth undoubtedly received the key words of the temple ceremony when Adam's righteous posterity gathered to Adam-ondi-Ahman, and Adam blessed Seth at that time to become the presiding patriarch. This is confirmed scripturally in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107:42, which states that from Adam to Seth, who was ordained a patriarch by Adam at the age of 69 years, and was blessed by him 3 years previous to his, that is Adam's, death, and received the promise of God by his father that his posterity should be the chosen of the Lord. Close quote. Once Seth received the authority and key words of the temple from Adam, he then administered the temple ordinances, or they occurred at and under his direction at Adam-ondi-Ahman for the first time. This is fairly implied in Abraham facsimile 2, figure 3, which represents, quote, the grand key words of the holy priesthood as revealed to Adam in the Garden of Eden, as also to Seth, Noah, Melchizedek, Abraham, and to all to whom the priesthood was revealed. Close quote. Note that Adam gets the key words in the garden, and perhaps they may have been revealed again, but Seth, Noah, Melchizedek, and Abraham had them revealed later on. So here's what we know. Seth would not have gotten the keys and key words any later than Adam-ondi-Ahman, when he was ordained by Adam at that place to succeed Adam. Nothing exists in the scriptures to suggest that something so important was revealed at any earlier time. And even if it was revealed to Seth at an earlier time, Seth would not have assumed to exercise those keys in the place of Adam until Adam bestowed those keys and blessed him at the time of Adam-ondi-Ahman. We know this because at Adam-ondi-Ahman, Adam's righteous posterity rose up and blessed Adam, as stated in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107:54, saying, the Lord appeared unto them, and they rose up and blessed Adam, and called him Michael, the prince, the archangel. Close quote. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So let's move on to our third reason to conclude that Adam-ondi-Ahman was the first occasion of temple ordinances. At Adam-ondi-Ahman, the Lord, who was Jehovah, appeared to Adam's righteous posterity. His appearance necessitated the people first entering temple covenants at that time. Doctrine and Covenants, section 84, verses 20 through 22, states that in the ordinances thereof, the power of godliness is manifest, and without the ordinances thereof and the authority of the priesthood, the power of godliness is not manifest unto men in the flesh. For without this, no man can see the face of God, even the Father, and live. Close quote. Speaking of these verses, the Encyclopedia of Mormonism states that some ordinances pertain to the holy temple, where the power of godliness is manifest. Temples embody and manifest sacred truths, the mysteries and peaceable things. They will enable the children of God to overcome the corruptible elements of their lives and enter the realms of light and fire, the presence of the Father and the Son. Close quote. Obviously, temple ordinances prepare a righteous people to enter God's presence. This is shown by the experience of Moses at Sinai, where the children of Israel were unworthy to receive their temple ordinances and were hence excluded from God's presence and, in fact, from the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood that was taken from their midst. And when we're talking here about the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood, what we're really talking about are the temple ordinances, the exalting ordinance, because Moses held the Melchizedek priesthood and he was not taken from their midst. So there were men, prophets, who had the Melchizedek priesthood, but people, the chosen people, were not ordained to exaltation through the receipt of temple ordinances and entering into the patriarchal order of the priesthood. At Adam-ondi-Ahman, in the future, Adam's righteous posterity will again gather, as they did anciently, worthy to receive the temple ordinances, and in the future, those that have already received them and are worthy of their temple covenants will be able to then come and participate and be part of the gathering that lies in our future. And when they do so, they will, quote, come up to the crown prepared for them and be made rulers over many kingdoms, close quote. We find that in Doctrine and Covenants, section 78, verse 15. The exaltation-worthy queens and kings will come into Christ's presence at the future gathering of saints at Adam-ondi-Ahman, just as Adam's righteous posterity came into Jehovah's presence anciently at Adam-ondi-Ahman after receiving their exalting ordinances. Let's turn now to the fourth reason to conclude that Adam-ondi-Ahman was the first occasion of temple ordinances. At Adam-ondi-Ahman, anciently, the Lord gave Adam the office and title of prince. That's set forth in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verses 53 through 55. Well, a prince is a title that places him next in position to the king. It places Adam at the head of the whole human family and one who presides over the patriarchal order of the priesthood. His priesthood authority is second only to Jesus Christ, who is the king. Consistent with the title of prince given to Adam at Adam-ondi-Ahman, we're told in Doctrine and Covenants, section 78, verse 16, that the Lord set Adam upon high and gave unto him the keys of salvation under the counsel and direction of the Holy One. Close quote. Now keep in mind, this particular scripture is specific to the context of the ancient gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman. Well, Joseph Smith explained the meaning of this verse, saying, this then is the nature of the priesthood. Every man holding the presidency of his dispensation, and one man holding the presidency of them all, even Adam, and Adam receiving his presidency and authority from the Lord. Close quote. Now notice that Joseph Smith is talking about Adam receiving his presidency and authority from the Lord. He doesn't mention specifically that it occurred at Adam-ondi-Ahman, but that's what's occurring as explained in Doctrine and Covenants, section 78:16, which was context specific to the ancient gathering of saints at Adam-ondi-Ahman. What's important about all this is the timing. Adam receives the keys of his presidency in the patriarchal order at Adam-ondi-Ahman, as stated in Doctrine and Covenants 78:16 that I just quoted. Well, at that time, Jehovah set Adam upon high at Adam-ondi-Ahman. After Adam was made a prince in the patriarchal order of the priesthood at that gathering, his righteous posterity could then enter the same priesthood order through the keys of Adam's presidency. So you always have to start at the top, and then the keys extend downward and are delegated to others in the organization. It's the same way in the gospel today. Joseph Smith got keys and priesthood as the head of the church in this dispensation, and from him, the priesthood and the keys get delegated to others. The same principle is taught of temple keys in Doctrine and Covenants, section 132:7, saying, quote, I have appointed unto my servant Joseph to hold this power, that is, of celestial marriage, in the last days, and there is never but one on the earth at a time on whom this power and the keys of this priesthood are conferred. Close quote. Joseph Fielding Smith spoke of this scripture saying, the president of the church, the prophet Joseph Smith, has clearly stated, holds the keys over all the church, or the keys of the priesthood. There is only one at a time on earth who has this power. No man can officiate in and confer the blessings of the temple without the authority to do so being delegated to him by the president of the church. No man can officiate in any capacity in this church without the virtue accompanying him in that act, as it is obtained through the power and keys held by the president of the church. Close quote. Now put that principle in the context of Adam, the prince, receiving the keys of salvation, that is temple authority, at Adam-ondi-Ahman. Before Seth was delegated the power of temple covenants from Adam, Adam first had to receive delegable power from Jehovah. In short, temple covenants were made possible at Adam-ondi-Ahman only after Adam was first made a prince who could preside over those sacred temple ordinances. In the history of the church, Joseph Smith broadly said, the priesthood was first given to Adam. He obtained the first presidency and held the keys of it from generation to generation. Close quote. Now, the prophet was not speaking in this quote of the keys that Adam received at the time of Adam-ondi-Ahman, but I think the statement applies in a more specific way. What we do know is that Adam received the keys of salvation at Adam-ondi-Ahman, and he conferred those keys on Seth 3 years before Adam died. Moving now to the fifth reason to conclude that Adam-ondi-Ahman was the first occasion of temple ordinances, we know that Joseph Smith called the patriarchal order of the priesthood the order pertaining to the Ancient of Days. Harold B. Lee noted this when he said, "We find from the prophet's own journal an excellent definition of what the holy endowment is, attending to washings, anointings, endowments, and the communication of keys pertaining to the Aaronic priesthood, and so on to the highest order of the Melchizedek priesthood, setting forth the order pertaining to the Ancient of Days, and all those plans and principles by which anyone is enabled to secure the fullness of those blessings which have been prepared for the church of the firstborn, and come up and abide in the presence of Elohim in the eternal worlds, and gain your exaltation in spite of earth and hell." Close quote. In Joseph Smith's journal, he talks about Adam as the Ancient of Days in connection with the endowment that he there describes. So when the temple covenants were restored to Joseph Smith, he restored what is called the ancient order of things, named after Adam, who is the Ancient of Days, and that's what he was named at Adam-ondi-Ahman. Orson Pratt tells us that there is the place where it was ordained that Adam should have the power, as the Ancient of Days, after a certain period and dispensations had rolled away, to come in his glory accompanied by the ancient saints, the generations that should live after him, and should take up their abode upon that land where they received their last blessing, there in the valley of Adam-ondi-Ahman. Close quote. You can see in this quote how Orson Pratt is tying together what happened anciently at Adam-ondi-Ahman and what will happen in the future at the same location at Adam-ondi-Ahman. So we come to this fundamental question of why would Joseph Smith refer to the patriarchal order as the order of the Ancient of Days if the implementation of that ancient order was not directly connected to the ancient gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman? Hiram Andrus makes the same connection as follows. Quote, 2 questions. First, who is the Ancient of Days? The answer is Adam. Question 2. What is the order or system that pertains to the Ancient of Days? The answer is the divine patriarchal order, which for this earth under Christ centers in Adam. This means that the person who goes to the temple receives the sacred rites, ordinances, and covenants that were initially administered to Adam and by which Adam became the father in 2 ways instead of 1. When a man goes through this sacred program, he comes out of the temple a patriarch, as Adam is a patriarch or a father spiritually over his children in the flesh. Close quote. Now, the scriptures that I have previously quoted all state that this occurred at Adam-ondi-Ahman. On that occasion, Adam's posterity revered him as Michael, quote, because he was the first and father of all, not only by progeny, but the first to hold the spiritual blessings of the temple, close quote, as we're told by Joseph Smith. Hiram Andrus adds to this saying that when Adam was about to pass from this mortal life, he called the great patriarchs of this divine family order together with the righteous of their posterity into the valley of Adam-ondi-Ahman. In this great council, they honored Adam in his role as a father spiritually under Christ. The Revelation states, and then he quotes D&C 107:54 that I've already talked about. So by way of summary, at Adam-ondi-Ahman, Adam instituted the same temple ordinances he received in the Garden of Eden. His final blessing given at Adam-ondi-Ahman undoubtedly incorporated the promise of exaltation based on temple covenants entered into at that time. Adam predicted whatsoever should befall his posterity unto the latest generation. He foresaw the glorious future for his righteous posterity based on temple covenants they made at Adam-ondi-Ahman. Only after Adam instituted the exalting ordinances of the temple could he then predict the blessings of kingdoms, thrones, and principalities. Think of your own patriarchal blessing and similar conditional promises that will be yours upon entering into the exalting ordinances of the temple and being faithful to those covenants. Let's now move to the sixth reason to conclude that Adam-ondi-Ahman was the first occasion of temple ordinances. First, it's a given that Adam's posterity had to prove themselves worthy of temple covenants as they responded to Adam's call to gather physically and spiritually. Adam and Eve taught the gospel to their posterity after the fall, as we're told in Moses 7:1, saying, "Behold, our father Adam taught these things, and many have believed and become the sons of God." Close quote. Let me digress for just a second. Because it says sons of God doesn't mean that only men became the sons of God. Men and women are referred to as sons of God as an expression of their right to inherit as an heir from God, their Father. So if a woman is a son of God, she's really one that stands in place to inherit. So all those generic things that they used to do in the olden days. But at any rate, the gospel was generally known among Adam's posterity, and Bruce R. McConkie explained the process of how the gospel was taught to Adam's descendants, saying, "The gospel plan was given to Adam line upon line and precept upon precept until he was the possessor of its everlasting fullness." Close quote. This means that the floodgates of all gospel ordinances were not given at first, and temple ordinances came after 1,000 years. Now, that seems like a long time, but since one day with God is as 1,000 years with Adam, his 930 years is kind of like our 70 years. And so Adam's posterity was spiritually gathered as they accepted the gospel over these hundreds of years, keeping in mind that many rejected the teachings and followed Cain, as I discuss in my podcast from December 31st of 2024. So the spiritual gathering of Adam's righteous posterity was a necessary precursor to their physical gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman as a future Zion people. I've alluded to Zion in my recent podcasts from March 4th and March 9th of 2025, and Donald Perry spoke about the role of temples in Zion, saying, "Perhaps one cannot overemphasize the import of temples and temple ordinances in the building of Zion in the last days, for the temple serves as the very foundation of Zion. And the Lord's people gather for the purpose of enjoying the great blessings that come from the temple. Before the full and glorious redemption of Zion, church members must receive the power, gifts, and blessings of the temple. Such endowments and blessings will be poured out in great abundance upon the heads of thousands and 10,000s of souls, as recorded in Doctrine and Covenants, section 110, verse 9. Close quote. Now, did you note that Brother Perry made reference to the temple serving as the foundation of Zion? And that's what I've been talking about in my prior podcast when I talked about the foundations, including the establishment of the patriarchal order of the priesthood, which occurs only in the temple. So to say that the temple is a foundation of Zion is the same thing as saying the patriarchal order of the priesthood is the foundation of Zion. So what is said of latter-day Zion is, of course, true of the first Zion established when the foundations were laid at Adam-ondi-Ahman. And Monty-Nyman also observed that gathering, in the highest sense of the word, means to receive the same temple blessings that Abraham received. Gathering to lands is primarily for the purpose of gathering to locations where we have or will build temples. As Joseph Smith said, the main object of gathering the people of God in any age to certain places is to build unto the Lord a house whereby he could reveal unto his people the ordinances of his house and the glories of his kingdom, and teach the people the way of salvation. Close quote. Now, if we apply those same principles to the purpose of gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman, the principles are eternal, by the way, they don't change. Adam physically gathered his righteous posterity to Adam-ondi-Ahman to receive the spiritual blessings of the temple. When we, and I say we, and I'm sort of keeping my fingers crossed for myself, when we gather to Adam-ondi-Ahman in the future, it will also be to receive spiritual blessings, but also to initiate the construction of the temple at Jackson County, Missouri. The 1992 Sperry Symposium states that the prophet Joseph Smith learned that the center place of Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be located at Independence in Jackson County, Missouri, which is consecrated for the gathering of the saints. There will be a temple there. The saints are to obey the command to gather to Zion, even to flee, for the gathering will be for a defense and a refuge. Zion will be built by the gathering of the saints, and it will be their inheritance. Close quote. So it seems pretty clear to me that the call to gather to Zion will begin with the future gathering of righteous saints to Adam-ondi-Ahman. There will be a call to construct the temple at Jackson County, also will begin with Adam-ondi-Ahman. The ancient and future settings of Adam-ondi-Ahman are types and antitypes, foreshadows and shadows. We see in one the mirror of the other. So what happens at the future gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman actually began at the ancient gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman, and history since then. Throughout history, the Lord's chosen people have physically gathered to Zion to build temples and receive their temple ordinances. Joseph Smith said, "The most important reason for the gathering of God's people together in any dispensation is to build temples. The temple is a foundation for Zion and is central to the principle of gathering. Thus it should be clear that the gathering of Adam's righteous posterity to Adam-ondi-Ahman was to receive their temple ordinances, and this became the model or prototype for later physical and spiritual gatherings to Zion." Turning now to our seventh reason to conclude that Adam-ondi-Ahman was the first occasion of temple ordinances, we know that the events at Adam-ondi-Ahman were a climactic end to the Adamic dispensation. At the end of Adam's life and dispensation, he bestowed on Seth the priesthood authority to administer the exalting temple ordinances, and Seth thus became the earth's second presiding patriarch. Adam's entire life was devoted to giving his righteous descendants the fullness of the Melchizedek priesthood through temple ordinances, and he died 3 years after bestowing this last and greatest blessing upon his posterity. Adam's devotion to the temple foreshadows in some ways the devotion of Joseph Smith to temple work before he died. Doctrine and Covenants, section 128, was revealed to Joseph Smith in September 1842, just 2 years before Joseph died on June 27, 1844. Verse 1 in this section states, quote, "I now resume the subject of the baptism for the dead, as that subject seems to occupy my mind and press itself upon my feelings the strongest since I have been pursued by my enemies." Close quote. Brigham Young described how, in the last years of Joseph's life, he was preparing the saints to receive the fullness of the priesthood, saying, "Before the temple was completed, Joseph Smith privately introduced President Young and other members of the 12 to temple ordinances, including baptism for the dead, the temple endowment, and family sealings, anticipating that the 12 would teach these ordinances to the members of the church. The prophet met with the 12 in the spring of 1844 to confer on them all of the keys and authority necessary to carry forward the work of the kingdom. I roll the burden and responsibility of leading this church off from my shoulders onto yours, the prophet proclaimed. Now round up your shoulders and stand under it like men, for the Lord is going to let me rest a while. Close quote. Joseph Smith presided over the first endowments in this dispensation on May 4th of 1842, and he then died at the hands of a mob in Carthage 2 years later on June 27, 1844. And I see in this the similitude of what happened with Adam, who bestowed on his posterity the temple ordinances and then died 3 years later. By way of conclusion to this podcast, I have to say there's not any one thing that tells us that the first temple ordinances on earth occurred at Adam-ondi-Ahman 3 years before the death of Adam. However, I have endeavored to set forth 7 things that all point to this conclusion. In the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't make much difference whether the first endowments and sealings occurred at the great gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman, but the fact that this was the likely place is so instructive of what still lies in our future at another gathering that will occur of righteous saints at Adam-ondi-Ahman. So this podcast is not so much about what happened in ancient history as it is about what it teaches us about what still lies in our future. So in this same vein, my next podcast will talk about the future gathering of saints at Adam-ondi-Ahman as seen through the eyes of the prophet Daniel in Daniel chapter 7. If you want to get a head start on this discussion, you can check out Daniel chapter 7 ahead of time. Until then, thanks for watching, listening, sharing, and subscribing, and to Jen and Kristen, and I will see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.